Denmark has been a leader in climate action for decades. A few years ago, Denmark launched what's known as the Group of Negative Emitters, the most ambitious coalition of governments that not only aspired to achieve a net zero status, but actually being negative emitters, having a positive impact on the state of our planet. And Denmark launched that with two other countries, Finland and the Republic of Panama. Since that time, the coalition has grown to 8 countries, and it will continue to grow. One of the objectives, actually, of the Island Resilience Summit here this week. Please join me in welcoming Juan Monterrey Gomez, Special Representative of Climate Change for the Government of Panama, Consul General Morten Lynge from Denmark, and our moderator, Heeta Lakhani, Executive Director of March for Science. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. What a wonderful and inspiring morning it's been, and welcome, colleagues. Matt set the stage pretty well, saying that, at COP28, there was a new group that emerged, the Group of Negative Emitters. And Denmark, Finland, and Panama are the 3 countries that have joined and are now part of this coalition of countries. This idea, this notion of negative emissions, where we go beyond net zero, we go beyond carbon neutralization, we go beyond just making the math work, we actually go minus. And that is the only thing that's going to help us as we're transitioning to a sustainable planet. We've said it for many years. Yes, we need to adapt to the impacts of climate change, but we're never going to be able to adapt to the impacts of an ever-changing planet. We're never going to be able to adapt to a planet which is 3 degrees warmer, maybe even more at the trajectory at which we're going right now. So this group is one of the key players when it comes to setting the stage on what action should look like at the national level. What should international collaboration look like? And how can we take the first steps into moving in the right direction? So with that, Morten, I'd like to begin with you. Denmark started this group of negative emitters. You were leading on this, and Denmark is now planning to be negative emissions by 2035. Can you tell us a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I'll be happy to, and thank you for inviting me here today to talk a little bit about Denmark and how we see the climate world at the moment. I think maybe first of all, I've heard a lot of talk about the islands at the forefront of climate change, but I would say there's also something that goes for Denmark. We are a small country, 6 million people. We have 7,000 kilometers of coastlines. We have 406 islands. And then a few more, including Greenland, that is a part of the Kingdom of Denmark, for those who should know. So every time we see severe weather in Denmark, we have 160,000 homes, buildings that's endangered. And all the estimates is that in 50 years, it will be 500,000 homes in Denmark that is in threat because of rising sea levels. So Denmark is also at the forefront of climate change. And I think in Denmark, we were the first country in 1971 to establish a Ministry for Environment. Since then, we have put a lot of focus on how we can do good for the world. And we have come a long way. We're now second in the world on energy transition. We're first in the world on Environmental Protection Index. And we have seen that having this focus is creating jobs and innovation in Denmark. So it's not anymore just about being good, but it's also about creating jobs and opportunities. So today, 8% of Danish exports is climate tech. So it's becoming also a business, and I think, was it Cornelius Shield before who also said that it's important with government interaction, but things also need to be commercial viable, and that's what we are trying in Denmark.
Wonderful. Juan, coming to you. Panama is already carbon negative. What does that mean? How have you managed to achieve that? And how do you plan to use this as a stepping stone and also as a way of inspiration for other countries to follow suit?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Heeta. And it's a pleasure to be here with Martin and Denmark, which has been a true partner over the years with the government of Panama. So the reason we are carbon negative, meaning that we absorb more pollution than the total amount of pollution that we generate, is because we have protected more than 30% of our land. Through that protection, Now you can see that about 60% of Panama's land is rainforest. So they are the main responsibles for Panama being carbon negative. On top of that, on any given day, the electricity matrix of Panama is quite green. So in any given day, from 70 to 90% of the electricity that we consume comes from renewables. During the raining season, some days it's even 100%. Because of the hydros that we have. So it is thanks to the forest, it is thanks to the rapid transformation of the electricity matrix that Panama is carbon negative. And we found out about our carbon negative status due to the national inventories that we develop every year. So about 5 years ago, instead of developing inventories just for single years, we started doing a time series. So we were analyzing from the 90s all the way up to 2020 how our behaviors on emission evolve. As of right now, we will remain carbon negative for about the next 10 to 15 years, depending on different pathways. But our commitment long term is to remain carbon negative. So those are the two key things that Panama has done. First of all, protecting and conserving our rainforests, and second of all, the rapid transformation of the energy grid, specifically for electricity.
Wonderful. So very rightly said, nature is one of the most essential resources that we have to bring carbon down. But nature is for everyone. It's not just for one entity. It's not for government. It's not just for private sector or just for civil society. So when we talk about a whole of society approach, how do we look at the role of public-private partnerships? How do we look at the role of different sectors in coming together in addressing the climate challenge? Morten, beginning with you.
I think public-private partnership is key here. That's what we have seen in Denmark. We established the first offshore wind farm in Denmark in 1971. That's a long time ago. And we saw our wind industry also getting support for government for many years. But now wind is the cheapest form of energy in Denmark, together with solar. And Denmark, we about 70% of our energy now is from wind and solar. And we are the second cheapest country in Europe when it comes to energy costs. And that's government who has helped push that agenda. And we see it within energy efficiency also. We have seen in Denmark the last 20 years, our GDP has been growing almost 30%. Our emission has been reduced with 30%. And at the same time, we have seen our energy use also go down. So this is, together with the public sector, putting out some visions and then working closely with the private sector to fulfill these targets. I think the best example we have just seen a few years ago, we established what we call climate partnership. So the government looked at 14 different industries in Denmark, like transportation, agriculture, energy, and so on. And then within each industry, they asked some of the key CEOs in the country to sit together with a group of people from the public sector and come up with a plan for how would this subsector help Denmark reach the overall targets. And a lot of interesting things has come out of this. I just want to highlight one of them is within agriculture. So Denmark just announced in December last year, I think it was, the first ever carbon emission tax on emissions from livestock, and the reason we're doing this is that today we can see 30% of our emission is from farming. And if we don't do anything, then by 2030, it will be 50% of our emissions from farming. So we have to do something. So the government sets a vision. They ask the industry, how can we work with this? So we make the tax. A lot of this money will go back into farming and help develop new technologies. And then we hope and we expect that to create new jobs in Denmark, where we can go out and sell the technology, partner with other countries and companies to get the big impact. Denmark is only 0.01% of total global emission. So whatever we do doesn't really matter. We need the global partnerships. So we see Denmark as a place where we are a rich country. We are the 9th richest country in the world. We can kind of allow ourselves to see ourselves as a pilot country. We do a lot of pilot, government put in money, and then we need to scale that by partnering.
Wonderful. And I think as you mentioned a little bit earlier when we were chatting, you said Denmark set up its first wind energy plant back in 1971. And that's 20 years before I was born. So congratulations on taking the lead and sort of showing what you can do no matter what the size of the country or the size of the emissions. Juan, coming to you. A little bit more when we talk about emissions reduction. What is the role on carbon markets when it comes to reducing carbon emissions, on the role of decarbonization?
Absolutely. So I just want to start with a quick story. This is my 4th EarthX and my 3rd ISP event. The first time I came to EarthX, I came as a World Bank consultant for carbon markets. The next year, I came as an NGO leader. Last year, I came as an anti-mining advocate. And today, I'm here as a special envoy. So what I have learned through the years is that the role doesn't matter. What matters is the mission. What matters is the commitment. We can contribute from every corner. And I might sound like a broken record, but the key partners here are business, investors, and private capital. That is why about 5 years ago, with the support from the World Bank, Panama decided to go full speed on creating the architecture for its domestic carbon market. But the word carbon markets is so complicated that people don't understand it, so we don't call it the carbon market, we call it the Reduce Your Footprint program. So back then we realized that we wanted companies to cut their footprint. However, they didn't know how to cut their footprint because I understood that business are so busy trying to get to their targets that often they don't have time to lift up their head, look around, and see the other standards that there are to make business greener. So we decided to start with a pilot voluntary phase. And our goal was to set up a national standard that every company had to use in order to first measure, reduce, compensate, and neutralize their carbon emissions. And we built this with me as the World Bank consultant, 2 interns as recent grads from university, and then 1 staff from government. We were targeting about 20 companies to come in the voluntary phase. And the first year we launched, 70 companies registered. It was so much that we could not handle, assisting 70 companies to do their carbon footprint measurement. So we had to grow the team. The next year, we had 150 companies. This year, we have about 250 companies. And what is the incentive? If you practice during the pilot phase, once we have the mandatory regulations, it's going to be a breeze for you. And that's what we're preparing to do in the next 2 years, to have mandatory reduction requirements for companies that belong to the most polluting sectors. So capacity building is key because we don't know what we don't know. And even business leaders need capacity building, and governments need to change the mindset of only regulation, regulation, regulation. You need to comply without providing this voluntary phase for companies and the business sector to be able to learn and to be able to adapt. Another thing that we found out is that there were not enough specialists in Panama to be able to support all these companies that now wanted to reduce their footprint. So we created a program from the Ministry of Environment so we could train more individuals and more professionals to practice during this pilot phase. So in the next 2 years, when we have it mandatory, there will be no excuse for the business sectors and the companies to comply. But we design everything hand in hand with the business and the private sector. In fact, we hosted more than 40 workshops and meetings all over Panama, sharing what we were planning to do, getting feedback back from the private sector, and that's why our program has been so successful. On top of that, I am also happy to announce that in the next 3 months, Panama is going to have clearance from the UN to sell about 20 million credits that come from the forest sector. So if your company, if your enterprise, or your network is looking for high integrity carbon credits to be able to offset some of your emissions, look at Panama, because in 3 months, we're going to be ready to sell. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, what a wonderful call to action by the end of it. I think to wrap us off, one interesting bit that has come out from here is definitely the role of how different sectors of society come together. It doesn't have to be a top-down policy process, but how do we work together across sectors to build collaboration? So SDG 17, which is Partnership for the Goals, is crucial to ensure that we can actually achieve climate action. On that note, any final comments from Morten and Juan that you would like to leave the audience with?
I think from my side, I think like events like this is super important. I think, again, a lot of solutions are out there. You can see the direction Denmark is going in. And we just need to implement that out in the world and have the capacity to do it. I think there's been a lot of talk about waste today. Just as an example, in Denmark now, only 3% of our waste go to landfills. The rest is recycled, reused, or used for incineration for heat or electricity. But we are so far with our recycling and reuse now that we don't have enough waste. So we are closing down our incineration plants now. We have 30. We are going down to 10. Right now, we're importing waste from overseas that we're then transporting to Denmark. So we have created a whole industry in how we recycle and reuse. As an example, it creates jobs, it creates wealth, it creates a good feeling about doing good. And that's some of these small things can easily be, replicated around the world. And we also need to think about that.
Yeah, it makes basic economic sense if you do it right. So yeah.
So my last comment is, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know, I want to do something, but I need some assistance, I need some training, I need some support, because we are all ignorant in so many things. But sometimes I feel that, business leaders and government leaders are afraid to show that they are not quite the experts on one thing or the other. So don't be afraid to request help, because we need all of you to come up to speed to be able to make it to the finish line.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And I'll end with one fun fact, actually, that connects all three of us. March for Science celebrated its 8th anniversary yesterday on Earth Day, and Juan's first march was at March for Science in 2017, which took place in Denmark. So, on that note, thank you for being here and for being such a wonderful audience.
That was my first protest.